So before we begin, everybody, I guess I just want to start by saying welcome. And this is an exploration of some ideas that come from the high performance space, is where I usually reside. And my name is Damon Valentino, and I'm a high performance coach, working in kind of typically with elite performers in business and in sport. People who have to function at a very high level in the midst of a lot of stress and a lot of turbulence. They have to be agile, they have to adapt. And as I was thinking about what it is that I could do right now, it felt really like a natural no-brainer thing to kind of use the skill sets that kind of typically go along with high performance and put them not in so much of a thrive mode where we are going to go and rocket and crush and be at the top, but this is kind of like, extended out into a little bit more of a survival mode. And, how do we stay kind of embodied? How do we keep ourselves where we are? So I'm gonna start to share my screen, and we'll be going through a little jaunt into inquiring within is the sort of the theme of this week. Before we get started, I want you to, if you have access to a journal, if you want to take notes, if you want to use the chat box to kind of be holding on to recording, we will record this and we will invite you to a private Facebook group where just the select few of us who are in this course will be able to rewatch this. So we'll post this there. And then on a daily basis, I'll throw a little daily to-do list in the morning, and you can just kind of click on that and just kind of get a little hit to kind of keep us focused, keep us centered. So I also want you to be mindful of, as I'm going through this, to think about things that trigger you. So if I say something that maybe you get a little bit of a tight clench in your throat, or your heart starts racing, or maybe you think it's BS, or it's something you want to explore a little bit deeper, make a note of that so that we can kind of circle back. Hopefully, if I can kind of stick to my program here, we'll have some time to do some reflection at the end. So that's really the goal, is to share some of the information with you, allow you a sense to be able to process some of that, and then towards the end do a little bit of a circle back reflection so that we can really consolidate some of the learning. So I want us to start by actually, I think I skipped over a slide here. Yeah, here we go. I want to tell a quick story. We're going to go in the Wayback Machine, and we are going to go back to 2 months ago. And I want to just kind of give you a quick little flyby about what was going on with me 2 months ago. I got on an airplane to fly down to Austin, Texas, to meet up with some really great friends to celebrate a 50th birthday party. And while we were there, we were going to bars, we were eating brisket, we were going out line dancing and switching partners, and we were just sharing an experience. We were ordering food, family style, and at that time, this Wuhan virus was starting to kind of make its way into kind of the lexicon of our media over here. And at that time, I think the Dow was at around almost 30,000 points, right? And so at that time, what my primary joy was really connecting with a lot of friends. I was building some professional relationships there, thinking about a project that I was going to do in LA with the LA Dance Project, run by Natalie Portman and her husband. Really excited about all of that. And my primary stress really was thinking about, should we purchase a house? How we're going to fold my mother in as a widow into our family. You know, these were the things that were going on in my mind. So then 1 month ago, approximately, I was getting back on an airplane again. This time I was flying down to Fort Myers to co-facilitate a program with Scott, who is on here with us, who is my partner here for this program. And I was very aware of the COVID-19. I was obviously aware that the markets had been on many occasions now frozen by the Fed to slow down all the trading. And I was flying and layover in Chicago, where I was very mindful to not be close to people, but I still felt bulletproof. And as Scott and I went down to do this training, we were on a day-to-day basis now doing elbow bumps with the people in the room, but still with people in the room. And, you know, the primary joy was really running this program, and primary stress now was around, hey, can we see this thing through? And the Dow had dropped about 8,000 points, I think, by then. And also, in terms of the virus, the first Chinese tourist died on Valentine's Day in Paris. And here we are today, where I have now been physically distant, as I'm sure most of you all have, for going on, you know, 3 weeks or so. And, you know, have, you know, done some of these Zoom calls and such. But I just wanted to frame that real quick, because I think it's important for us to remember how radical this new reality is for us right now, and how much it has affected us. And also, by the looks of it, how much we've been able to adapt in some ways. That's not to say we're not all dealing with a lot right now, because we are. But the fact of the matter is, as human beings, we are wired for change. And so this is not to put a rosy spin on the moment, but it is to give you a sense of a concept called neuroplasticity. And that is that our brains change, and they change primarily based on these three factors. This research comes from neuroscientist Dr. Andrew Huberman. Number one is the sense of agitation or urgency. I feel pretty confident that we can probably all check that box right now. Number two is a deep sense of focus. So whatever it is that we're really focusing in on, our brain starts to wire around. And the third one is rest and recovery. And so these are going to be kind of key elements for us as we think about how to deal with this moment. So in the chat box, can you just really quick, briefly, as a snap, same 1 to 5 scale, the 5 being the maximum, what is your level for each one of these? What's your level of urgency? How focused do you feel? Do you feel like you can really lock in on focus? And how has your recovery or rest been?
1 to 10?
1 to 5.
1 being
the lowest, like I'm not doing this very well. The highest being, I would put myself a 5 in terms of urgency. Focus for me a little scattered, so I would throw myself maybe around a 2 or 3, and then recovery and rest, you know, maybe yeah, there you go.
Let's see. 1.
Good stuff. Good stuff. So this is just a way to do a little quick self-reflection, and also just to kind of give you a sense that, again, we are, as a species, wired for change. And if we can kind of like stick the landing on how to kind of cultivate and craft these things, it can do wonders for allowing us to kind of get through this moment, survive it, and then maybe come out the other side feeling like maybe we've learned some things, or we've developed a little bit more resilience. So here's an overview of the course. This week is all about inquiring within. So we're really going to look under the hood with ourselves. Take a little bit of a deeper dive. Use this as an opportunity to do some reflection on, who we really are, what are the stories we're telling ourselves, and maybe what are some of the blind spots that have, maybe kept us, stuck in certain areas. And this is a really powerful time to potentially crack open. Week 2 is around reimagining. So who do we want to be? So imagine if, and then we sort of fill in the blank. So that week we're going to do a lot more. Today in this course, you're really, doing a lot more reflection and listening to me. Next week we'll be doing a lot more in terms of breakout rooms where you're sharing your story and you're putting voice to some of the things that you want to potentially kind of move into. Week 3, calling this a new coronation. So there's a really beautiful frame around post-traumatic growth. And there's some really wonderful science around people who have gone through PTSD that have really been able to kind of up-level themselves. So really a little bit more optimistic in terms of how we're going to build from here. And then the week 4 is really kind of putting it all together, a new alignment, rebuilding these resilient systems. So those of you that might have come in a few minutes late as well, I'm going to it's recording, and I'm going to share this link as well. So, and invite you to a private Facebook group. So definitely take notes if you feel it, but also kind of take in the information and know that this will be available to you as well. So first things first is I really want us to kind of define our playground a little bit. And what I mean by that is that Scott actually tells a beautiful story around this, where there's a teacher who went out into a field, probably about 3 football fields the size, with her young elementary age kids. She stood in the middle of the field and there was no boundaries around it. And the kids, when they were given no instruction, and they naturally just gravitated straight to her as the source of calm and familiarity. And they did the same experiment a bit later, but they put a fence around this whole field. And so once the teacher kind of went into the middle of the field and they kind of let the kids kind of go into the field, as soon as they saw that the fence was around the field, boom, they scattered everywhere. So, the thought process being like, once we know our boundaries, that we have some room to explore. And so for us, the basic framework around the boundaries of the playground that we're in right now starts with n equals 1. And what that means is that you are the expert of yourself. I am more of a curator, a facilitator. I am not a sage on the stage. I am not an expert who's going to tell you what to do. You are the expert in you. So really, take that role, take what I say, see if parts and pieces fit for you. But by no means is this about me sort of telling you how to be or how to go. The next one is to stay present and judge later. So you may be triggered in certain moments. You may feel uncomfortable in certain times. Try to ride that out. Try to just kind of play the game. And then upon reflection, we can judge, why you are feeling certain ways. Third one is give everybody in this group the benefit of the doubt. We're all coming to this space from a lot of different stresses and strains, and that does crazy things to us sometimes. So let's sort of live under the model of giving each other the benefit of the doubt. Next one is use your own learning style. If you're somebody that needs to process verbally and brainstorm out, great. If you're somebody who's a little bit more introspective and a little more introverted, that's fine as well. So just be yourself here. And then the final thing is that really that learning is the process here. The goal is to learn. And it's not to master right now. It's more to learn. So this is a pretty key time, and it's something that our brain really likes to kind of fall into, and that is that kind of the tale of two realities. you know, I could show you an image of the map of coronavirus, for example, and all the deaths on one map. I could show you on another map the lack of pollution and smog, the ecological advances, dolphins coming into the Venice canals on another map. And this is really kind of what happens for us in terms of perception. You know, we can easily go down one, you know, path, you know, in this sense, a little bit more of a dark path, or we could be going down that other light path. And neither of them are false per se, but I think underlying this course is, how do we kind of grab the reins and elect to spend the time that we want to in the place that makes the most sense for us. So I would caution against, you know, getting too, you know, looped into mainstream media for hours on end, for example. You know, it's really easy to go down those rabbit holes. So we want to try to grab the reins and really shift our attention back and forth so that we, you know, we can stay healthy and we can stay grounded. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we move forward. But really, the question of dark and light is one side of the story. You know, it might actually be more of a question of above and below, because for all of us, we have a lot that triggers us, and we live a lot from underneath the surface, underneath our level of consciousness. You know, conservatively, we could say 60% of our actions are based on things that are being triggered in places that we don't have access to. So if you look at this list, you know, cultural paradigms and sense of self-worth, things that happen when you were a child, that need for belonging, trauma, you know, different habits, and then close to the surface, you know, more of emotions and values and intuition. Those are almost the conduits between, you know, your unconscious and the conscious space. So if 60% of the time minimum, we're sort of living from this place that we don't have a conscious connection to, maybe it isn't so much about the dark and the light, but a little bit more of, how do we access that? How do we develop the type of mind that can become more self-authoring than, you know, kind of feeding off the environment around us? You know, we have two senses of external and an internal sense of loci. And if we are kind of getting and being fed and being triggered by the things that are happening outside of us, and then this trigger happens from something that's deep inside of us, that can feel we can feel very ungrounded in that. And that lack of control sort of can spin us a little bit more towards kind of going in the direction of getting kind of stuck in the rabbit hole. So these are just really important things to be mindful of. A Harvard psychologist, Robert Keegan, really kind of framed the adult development theory around these concepts. And we're going to dig deeper into that as we go along on the course. But for now, just sort of be mindful of the fact that, you know, there are times when things kind of pop up, but we don't really know why. And this can be part of a reason why, to explain that. And then another reason why this potentially happens is that within our brains, essentially, our brains are the central bank in our body that runs our body. And as the central bank, it allots a budget. And that's based on the kind of energy that we have and the kind of neurochemicals that have been replenished inside of our brain. So for example, our brain, you know, it keeps our heart beating, you know, all these functions that we're not aware of, right? You know, we're breathing, our organs are all functioning. And these are all, you know, sent from the central command of the brain throughout the body. And the brain's primary purpose for us is to keep us safe and to keep us alive. It doesn't give a darn about our happiness. And so it's really interesting when we start to think about emotions, and there's some really amazing cutting edge science around emotions in general done by Lisa Feldman Barrett. And really the way that she framed her work, and she's, you know, I'll cite, and we'll do deeper dives in all this stuff, but that this budget that the body runs on, if our systems are not running at full capacity, if we're not replenishing and doing the things that we need to do, our brain starts to make predictions about where it should budget its energy. And how does it make its predictions? It's basically a gambler making predictions, hedging bets based on past experiences. So our brain looks at, oh, hey, you know, these past experiences are how the brain then doles out that budget. So really, really fascinating to think about if an emotion kind of comes up in our consciousness, that instead of looking at it through a psychological frame, Feldman Barrett suggests us to look at it more like a virus. And what she means by that, I know that's a really touchy word right now, but what she means by that is to say, hey, if I'm feeling sadness kind of well through me, instead of searching for what happened out in my life that makes me sad, who affected me, maybe it's more simple, like I am not properly hydrated, or I haven't gotten the proper rest. So when we think about sort of how to connect to sort of getting ourselves kind of under the surface with some of those inner triggers, this can be a really wonderful way for us to kind of create the psychological lens to then, you know, pivot towards a more functional, pragmatic way to deal with some of the problems that we're dealing with. And here, and we're going to do a lot of work around this in this program. You know, I call this the wellness wheel. And if any one of these things kind of fall out of function, it can really set a domino effect. I think we all realize now how interconnected we are. And it's the same sort of thing that happens within our own body. If our nutrition is poor, for example, that can have a cascading effect on the type of thinking. Our cognitive capacity can go down. If we're not properly hydrated, and literally the studies are showing that even if it's 2% below level of hydration, that can have an effect on our cognitive capacity as well. So this is, as I said, the wellness wheel, and we're going to be focusing a lot of our work this week on kind of building the habits and creating the routines around, you know, choosing to be thinking, you know, choosing proper thoughts and thinking thoughts that are more productive for us, and then all the way down the line. Here's a basic cascade of, you know, kind of a stress response, right? So, you know, we feel this rush of stress. Our brain will drip some cortisol, and our heart will start beating faster. Our focus will narrow. Our thinking, our creative capacity narrows. We start making poor choices. We start to contract within ourself. We kind of turn in. We sort of isolate without even realizing this is happening. And within all of that, there's this sense of separation. There's this sense that it's me and then the rest of the world. You know, it's me and then it's them. And then that just exacerbates that stress. So this is a nasty cycle that all of us fall into. And really what we're trying to do here is kind of become more self-aware, thus the title of this program, Inquiring Within, so that we can find ways to mitigate this and maybe cut this off at the pass in certain ways where that contraction can turn into expansion, and we can become more curious about what we're feeling. And that all ties back into the body budget and the emotional identification work. So we'll be doing a daily survey around some emotional identification, and I'll share that with you, you know, as we get done with this program. But just to know that this cycle, it's quick, and when we kind of fall into it, it's tough to get out of it. And so one of the biggest bangs for the buck is through breath work. And it is really wonderful way to mitigate some of that stress and to create a little space to allow ourselves not to kind of get stuck in all the fight and flight freeze mode. And so one thing that we're going to do as I click to this next slide is we're going to do a quick 1-minute breath practice together. And the man who sort of was like, has done incredibly extensive work around PTSD, Bessel van der Kolk, he's renowned for being able to kind of bring people into coherence. So this specific breath practice, I call it the 5-5-6, right? So it's, you're going to inhale for 5, you're going to exhale for 5, and we're going to do that 6 times. And when we do this together, not only do you become coherent, where on the in breath you have a sense of clarity, but on the out breath you kind of come back into a sense of calm. What's so beautiful and elegant about this is that the recent studies they're doing that even when we do this digitally, our hearts all become coherent with one another. So we literally become, we literally kind of get in sync with each other and our own heartbeats, even though we're on this Zoom call together. So go ahead and get yourself comfortable. Again, so it's just don't stress it or strain it. If you can't get all the way to 5, that's okay. But I'm just gonna kind of count it off on my hand. So, and I'm gonna let you guys do it. So I'll just be doing the verbal. All right, here we go. Inhale, 2, 3, 4, 5. Exhale, 2, 3, 4, 5. Inhale, 2, 3, 4, 5. Exhale, 2, 3, 4, 5. Inhale, 2, 3, 4, 5. Exhale, 2, 3, 4, 5. Inhale, 2, 3, 4, 5. Exhale, 2, 3, 4, 5. There we go. Nice, everyone. So that is, again, an offline tool to use. And I suggest if you're doing Zoom calls, pre-work meetings, happy hour with your friends or family, it's a really effective and powerful way to sort of get on the same page. And 1 minute, it's really interesting how much we take for granted breathing, right? I mean, it's just something obviously that we all do. And it hasn't been that many years that I've kind of taken a deeper dive in breath training and breath practice, but this is going to be another one of those effective tools to sort of mitigate some of that stress, to allow us to kind of come back into our bodies and to kind of get ourselves kind of out of that fight or flight, which is critically important right now during all these stressful times. Oops. So I want us, now that we have just a little bit semblance of calm, to address the elephant in the room around what we're all experiencing. And we're all having our own experience in this right now. But, the imagery I have around this is that there were billions of jet skis, and we all had our own jet ski, and we're just zipping all through, making wakes and bouncing over other people's wakes, and just kind of living our lives in our own ways. And in the blink of an eye, our self-sufficient jet skis all disappeared, and we all opened our eyes and found ourselves in one giant boat. And that boat has just bobbing back and forth in the middle of the sea. And here we all are in the first time in all of our lives where the entire planet is literally focused on the same thing. And with that, the agitation that we feel, that sense of, I feel a little bit like a caged tiger at times, the underpinning of that is loss. And we've all lost something. You know, we've lost our way of life. We've lost the ability to go, you know, line dancing with our friends in Texas. We've lost the ability to sit at dinner with people. We've lost the ability to go next door, lost the ability to hug our grandmother or a mother. There's a tremendous amount of loss. And it's important to frame this experience that we're going through within the context of the stages of grief. And Elizabeth Kubler-Ross did phenomenal work around this, mostly with death and loss through death and dying. But if we think about the stages of grief for our current situation, it can, again, help us to kind of mitigate and become a little clearer about what's going on. So the denial is a crucial stage. And just to preface all of this, we don't necessarily need to go through all of these stages, and we don't necessarily need to go through all in a linear fashion. And we can kind of bounce back and forth between them. You know, there are days when I go from denial to anger to depression, and then kind of like by happy hour, I'm like, oh, okay, and then I go into acceptance, right? So there's a whole cycle of all of this, and this isn't to say that, you know, again, we all go through each one of these. Back to that n=1, we're going to process all of this differently, but it's important for us to address them. You know, seasons have been shut down, livelihoods have been lost, so many different elements that are going on. So, you know, just to give you a quick overview though, you know, denial really is our brain and body's way of helping us to survive loss. So, you know, if we, you know, a lot of times I'll talk to people and they're like, yeah, I've accepted it, I'm fine. And, you know, really after a half hour or so, we come to realize that they're actually in denial. You know, they haven't really gotten through any of them, right? So, and then that anger kicks in, and the upshot of anger is that by triggering into anger, we are sending the signal that we want to continue. So we're pissed off about what's happening right now, but we're not reserved, we're not resigned to give up. You know, the temporary truce of bargaining is an interesting one, where like I found myself today saying, well, all I have to do is get through April. And then in May, you know, I'll be able to go down and see my mom. And, you know, you start to kind of tell stories with yourself without really knowing if that's really true. But that bargaining is you know, again, it's one of those stages that you're going to find yourself in on occasion. Depression is when it just kind of like really settles in that, you know, this is the real deal. And we are, you know, it's appropriate to feel depressed on a lot of levels, because this really has been a significant change. And then that sense of acceptance, where it's new reality. It doesn't mean we have to like it, but it's sort of the way I frame it around the high performance space is, you can either kind of be stuck in this why me or why us, or you can shift that to now what, right? And when we kind of embrace acceptance, we start looking for answers. We start thinking about, okay, well, what can we do next? So if anybody, you know, again, we're gonna do some surveys once we sort of get into the course throughout this week, and I want to be able to kind of unpack this a little bit more for you as we do. But just for now, realize that, you know, things might be coming up in you that you're not sure why, but, you know, it's a natural reaction to kind of, you know, have to deal with these stages. So the good news is there is some pushback that we're capable of. And the pushback is really important for us to, when we kind of embrace some of that acceptance, to start to kind of shift ourselves towards, you know, what can we do? So if we do get ourselves saying, now what? You know, the first real big thing that's important to do is to start paying attention to our attention, right? what are we thinking about? Where is our camera focused? And really the beautiful thing about that is that when we pay attention to our attention, we are now starting to look and make this subject-object split. So we're not trapped behind our own eyes. We're sort of seeing ourselves, you know, feeling and acting in certain ways. And when we do that, you know, we're creating some space. And with that little precious amount of space, we can mitigate some of the stimuli coming our way. And instead of having this reactivity off of it, we can offer a response that's in line with our values, that's in line with sort of the direction we want to go. And imagining your happy place, we'll get to that in a minute as well. Climbing down the ladder and struggling with grace. So these are going to be the four that we cover right now. So paying attention to your attention literally is quite simply this. Your camera is pointed at something. We can only attend to what we're attending to. We like to think that we're multitaskers. We're not. We're single taskers. So we'll do a single thing and then we'll focus on the next thing and then the next thing and the next thing, and we'll have all these balls in the air. But we cannot hold all those balls in the air at the same time. You know, and literally it comes down to this. If I'm talking to you right now, you have the capacity to hear me. If another person starts talking to you, you have the capacity to hear us. Now, if a third person enters in, you can't hear any of us any longer. That's about as much of bits of information as we can hold. So if that's the case, then we have to be really mindful of where we are directing our attention. So the skill isn't so much to get rid of what we're looking at, it's to shift towards looking at something else. And you know, this is a muscle, it's a skill like anything else, and we can get better at this. It doesn't mean we go into denial and forget about what else is happening, but it helps us to not ruminate so much and get stuck in that space. So an interesting conversation I was listening to last week where a neuroscientist was talking to a chair of psychiatry. And he was saying to him, this is my daughter, by the way, this is clearly my happy place. But he was asking him, he said, hey, what coping skills have you found have been the most successful in your practice and in your research as we're kind of going through this corona phase? And the psychiatrist said, you know, we're really going to have to, you know, unpack this one pretty deeply. So, you know, hold on here and get your notebook out. And then he said, it's imagining your happy place. And literally, quite literally, the most effective thing we have right now to mitigate all of the trauma that we're all feeling and a lot of that grief and loss is to create imagery around the thing that makes us feel the best. This is a beach in Costa Rica. This is sunset with my daughter and we, you know, writing our names. This is where I go. You know, when it's all hitting the fan, this is where I go. And here's the really interesting thing. Your brain doesn't know the difference if you can effectively create imagery, whether you actually are there or whether you are conjuring this up in your mind. You know, athletes have been using visualization for a long time in this way. But if you can create the sense of using multiple senses, being able to not have time, you know, get out of control for you. So if it's in the proper time. So just to give you a sense right now, I can hear the waves. I can feel the salt kind of drying on my skin. I can taste a little bit of the salt on my mouth. I can feel the sun hitting me. I can feel my heart beating because I just came out of there riding those waves. And I can feel the grains of sand underneath my legs. Bringing the environment alive so it's an incredible practice, and it's something that I'm going to ask all of us to do this week, is to find our happy place. You know, this is, like I said, this is coming from sort of the top end of psychiatry as the prime coping skill to be able to mitigate that stress and push back a bit against it. Whoops. Another model that I think is really important for us to think about is this ladder of inference. And so the bottom rung of the ladder is reality. And it's where facts really live. And it's where our senses can take in information. And what happens more so now than most times is that we, scroll Twitter, we start seeing some disastrous news on some media site. We start connecting that to some other bit of information that we overheard somewhere else. We Google something about something. And now all of a sudden we're putting the story together in our minds that is frankly not necessarily based in fact. But again, just to, as I mentioned, the happy place, when we climb up this ladder, this has very destructive consequences on our nervous system when we do that. So how do we climb back down the ladder? How do we recognize that we've kind of climbed up the ladder? Our self-talk is now going into places that's, frankly, maybe not necessarily rooted in reality. So that pushback is really to kind of understand that, hey, I'm up the ladder, and in my life working with competitive teams and executives, we like to build in this practice where, hey, let's climb back down the ladder. Let's get our feet back on the ground. What do we see? Let's get back into our senses. Look around. What do you see? What do you hear? What can you smell? What are you grateful for? Taking that breath that we worked on before. These seem like small offline tools, but they do really, monumental Herculean efforts to keep us from, kind of spinning and spiraling out of control. And then struggling with grace. This is also a really interesting kind of thought project for us to unpack a little bit. I have a deep connection with flow, which is sort of the ultimate state of human consciousness where we feel our best and perform our best. And it's sort of framed around peak performance. And I was listening to a neuroscientist and a Navy SEAL talk about it. And what I found really striking was that the Navy SEAL mentioned that, no. It's not about peak performance. It's about optimal performance. And what he meant by optimal performance was, what's the most optimal thing to be doing right now? And that step can look like a lateral move. It can look like a step backwards. But with these guys who are going on missions, they would become, perfect about preparing their gear, for example. And what I've been doing lately when I've kind of gone up the ladder is I have been making my daughter macaroni and cheese with peas. And I've been making that macaroni and cheese with the most precise, focused, Zen master approach that I can possibly take. And by doing that, it shifts my state. So no longer am I spiraling in that or ruminating. I'm back in my body. I am in control of what the action that I'm performing right now. And I am now struggling with grace. So the flow cycle basically goes struggle, release, flow, recovery. Well, most of us are really kind of like stuck into this struggle space right now. And it's a bit of a bottleneck. There's an agitation to it. But if we can embrace that struggle and really become 100% with our B game, our C game, whatever it is that we can bring to the table, it's in a sense being our best when we're at our worst. And these small, seemingly simple actions that we perform, go make the best damn cup of coffee you've ever made in your life. Really kind of pour yourself into these small activities. It's a really wonderful way, again, to push back. And to that point, when things are big, go small. And this is a really, really helpful model, I find. When we're feeling overwhelmed, change the game. So if I'm daunted, I will, like, as I mentioned, I will go make a cup of tea, and I'll do it with, mindfully. When we're feeling powerless, take action. This can be something as small as dropping down and doing 10 push-ups, doing some stretching, making a list, You know, if you're so lucky to be able to garden or use your hands or play the flute, you know, these are all actions that we can take when we're feeling powerless and sort of spinning out of control. And then if we're feeling alone, support someone else. I've found this really elegant site online called Human Online. And if you sign up to Human Online, you essentially will open your camera up and there'll be, it'll prompt you. It'll say like 375 people online. And the whole gist of it is when you click I'm ready, somebody else from somewhere else in the world will show up on your screen and you spend 1 minute staring at each other. The prompt is to not talk. You smile. Thus far, I've stared at people from Namibia, Africa, Brazil, India, other places in the US, a lot of peace signs, a lot of lipping of stay safe. And it's a really beautiful way to support someone else in this moment when everything sort of feels out of control. And then there's the other ones, right? You know, make a meal, call somebody that needs help, donate to a cause, support the EMTs and the ER docs and the grocery people who are, you know, going out there and putting their lives on the line. So this is a really beautiful way to pivot out of that helplessness feeling and do something that kind of feels that pushback. Okay, again, the biggest bang for the buck, however, though, is breath. And this practice is, you know, Scott and I did a training in Florida. And when I did this practice and I explained why, the feedback was, hey, that was cool that you told us why, that this was so effective. So this is called the double in, and I actually added the low and slow at the end. It's supposed to just be an exhale through your mouth. But you essentially just breathe in 80% full, and then you breathe the other 20, and then you just breathe out your mouth. And the reason for this is that there's one spot in your body, your diaphragm, that has a nerve connected to it called the phrenic nerve, which is part of the greater, larger vagus nerve system in your body. The vagus nerve basically is the super highway to tell your brain, hey, everything's cool, we can chill. And this specific nerve has a fast track right to your brain. So by doing this practice where you're inhaling 80% and then bringing that next 20 in, you are stimulating that nerve to remind the brain everything's okay. So doing this 3 times is been shown to be an effective way to mitigate the sympathetic nervous system and kind of like send you back into rest and digest. And just for the sake of time, I'm going to keep moving, but I just want you to know that these practices are all going to be part of, you know, the sort of the list, the a la carte list that I put together, and you guys will have daily access to. But if you find yourself in a moment, this is a really beautiful one. And the last big pushback is around gratitude. Now, again, our brain's primary desire is to keep us alive, which means that it's always on the lookout for danger. And there's an ancient part of our brain that is ready to sound the alarm button at a moment's notice. You know, the classic story about the man walking in the grass, and he comes across a curvy brown shaped thing in the grass and gets this rush as if it's, you know, thinking that it's a snake. And then as he gets a little closer, he realizes that it's not moving. It looks a little bit more, you know, coarse. It looks a little bit more like a stick. And as it turns out, it was a stick. And then obviously he can keep walking. This is the dilemma that happens in our brain all the time. The amygdala, or the center of our alarm center of our brain, it's gonna send that alarm very, very fast. And it's really hard to put the genie back in the bottle. Once it sort of kicks into gear, all these, you know, the cortisol and a lot of the stress hormones come through your body. It's very difficult to kind of come back and push back from that. Gratitude and the science is basically a 9-to-1 ratio of negative to positive that we go through. Somewhere around the number of 60,000 thoughts we have a day. somewhere around the fact that 90% of those thoughts are negative, and that 90% of those thoughts are repeats. So we're sort of churning in the same juices that have us, feeling kind of down and anxious and all the other negative emotions that we can feel. Gratitude has been shown to be one of the best practices to kind of push back against that. And gratitude is wonderful because we're talking about what we're already grateful for. We're not talking about things that are in the future that we hope happen, our goals, our big goals, right? Gratitude's simple. Our brain has a really good BS meter. So these are things that have happened and that are happening. So the practice this week is going to be to, on a daily basis, construct two pieces of gratitude, big, and then one very small one. So for me, today was grateful to have a comfortable, safe home to live in, grateful that my wife and daughter are healthy, and grateful to see the tiny little buds that are starting to kind of appear on the trees, right? So something that sort of would typically kind of pass you by, find those little small moments and blow them up. It can be a really wonderful way to mitigate. We can't get back to the 1-to-1 ratio, but if we can kind of go 9-to-1 down to 6-to-1, and we have a fighting chance to be able to kind of like navigate this without getting stuck in that sympathetic nervous system. So here we are towards the end, and those of you who are sticking with this and staying around for the 30 days, this is where I think it's important for us to just sort of jot down a few things maybe that kind of came up that you feel like, hey, yeah, that seems like a practice that I feel like I could start. And again, it could be something as small as making a mindful cup of coffee. It could be, focusing a little bit on my hydration. And just so you know, all that wellness stuff that I spoke about, I'm going to give you sort of the specs around the optimal. And so, you'll have a PDF to be able to kind of like inform your own practice as we kind of move through the week.